Hello, everybody. It is I, Alejandro. No, the sound is on now, I believe, my friends. So, yep, there we go. Anyway, I am here. I had a little bit of stuff to set up to get rolling. Sorry so much that it took a little bit of time to get rolling here, but we're rolling now. So it's kind of funny. So I was like, hey, man, there's not going to be much to talk about because there isn't a lot of news going on. But there is actually a lot of stuff that's happened since the last time that we talked. So again, sorry about that sound and everything, which was kind of funny because someone at the beginning, I guess when I was trying to set up, could hear me, and I must have pushed the wrong button. There's so many buttons to push here, producing and directing the show all on my own. But we got it rolling, baby. So my name is Alejandro Rojas. I am a journalist. For the most part, I do all kinds of different stuff. I do real estate. So if you're in the Arizona area and you need a real estate agent, or if you need a referral in the state you're in, contact me. But I also do social media consulting, some PR consulting sometimes, all kinds of freelance cool stuff, some video work, all kinds of stuff. But that's me. But of course, I have a passion for UFOs, and I've been working with and managing OpenMinds.tv for a very long time. So the reasons we couldn't talk, let's see, like a couple weeks ago, we were headed to the airport going to AlienCon. So I'll talk about that in just a minute. And then last week, of course, was Thanksgiving. So here we are. We're back. We're together. Thank goodness. And we've got a lot of fun stuff to talk about. But first of all, I want to say thank you. Oh, and Karen is setting a lot of products over here. So obviously she wants me to push some merch. But speaking of which, I do have this cool UFO, and this is hovering. I think you guys saw this before. Here's a piece of my news piece of my mail that the dog ate. But see, see how it floats there? It's actually anti-gravity for reals, yo. So we're out of those. But we do have gray and silver ones, so you got to check out the store. In fact, I was going to put a silver one up here because they're really, really cool. They're entirely silver. So we have silver and gray ones, so go check that out. But we've got a lot of new products at the store at store.ufocongress.com. I'll talk a little bit more about those later. She's trying to put some more out here, but she doesn't realize that she's completely off the screen. But we'll talk more about some of that later. But I want to get into some of the news. Lots of really cool news and information that's gone on. And I was thinking about, doing some news, and there wasn't much news. But when I started to put everything together, I saw there's actually a lot of cool stuff that has gone on in the last few weeks. And you know what? When there's no news going on, you got to make your own. So a lot of the news and really cool stuff that I want to talk about is actually from the podcast or different things we've been doing here at OpenMinds.tv. Before I get into that, just a few thank yous. I want to go down my list here really quick here because I've got a lot of new patrons. So thank you so much. We're going to look at my patron page in just a second, but I want to read this list. Thank you to Amy, Andrew, Craig, Dave, Gary, Guillaume, James, Joseph, Layla, Les, Richard, Ron, Ryan, Stewart, another Stewart, and Waylon. Thank you all so much for being patrons. It helps out a ton, so I could keep doing this UFO stuff and other stuff that I'm doing. It helps to get some funds because otherwise, as a freelancing on all these different things, I got to pay the bills, so I have to go where the money is. So it's very helpful when you're able to do that, because then I can spend more time doing this stuff. But as I said, let's go to the patron site. Oh, look at this. Lee Spiegel is calling me. Lee, leave me alone. Lee Spiegel, of course, who used to write UFO stories for the Huffington Post. Now he's working with James Fox on an exciting documentary, and I can't wait till we can talk more about that. But I had him on the show not too long ago, And of course, coming up in like a month here, he and Martin and I will probably do a end of year review like we do. But let's take a look. We'll let Patron drive us for a minute. So a lot of what we've been doing lately is around Bob Lazar. Ooh, and I want to show you some cool stuff. So Bob Lazar, of course, is the guy who made Area 51 famous. He, in 1989, came out to KLAS Las Vegas, the news channel that George Knapp works for, and said, I've worked at this lab near Area 51, out of Area 51 essentially, where I back engineer alien spacecraft. He was anonymous. He went by the name Dennis. And I know now that, or at least I was reminded recently, that for a long period of time, then the story went huge, but they didn't really talk much about him. George Knapp then started to investigate the case even further, found some more information, and was eventually able to get Dennis, the anonymous person who was going by Dennis, to come out and say, okay, my real name is Bob Lazar, and here's the deal. It's real. I would fly into Area 51. I would ride my bus then to this site south of Area 51 near this place called Papoose Lake, and go underground in this lab called S4. And here is where I would work reverse engineering these propulsion systems. I was never told whose they were, but I believe them to be alien because like the machinery and the seats inside of this craft were small. And in fact, they referred to the pilots of the craft as kids, he said, because they were small in stature. And he believes that the technology they were working on was so advanced it had to be alien. He's actually passed polygraph tests. However, he says he's got a couple degrees, including one from, I think, Caltech and MIT were the 2 degrees. It has not been able to be confirmed that he's had those degrees. He also said he worked at several facilities, for the government where their top secret work was being done. And at first, those were not able to be confirmed either. However, George Knapp was able to find that Bob did work at Los Alamos, which is true. Highly secure location. Not only did Lazar take George Knapp to Los Alamos, and people were familiar with him and let him in, George Knapp was able to find a directory of employees there with Lazar listed. Now, there's a lot of debate about this. Like, maybe he was probably just a subcontractor working for a subcontractor. That's why he was allowed to go in and why he was on that roster. He says differently, and the debate rages on. And the debate should rage on because, as you can see, I'm a bit skeptical myself. But I must say, there's a new documentary out here by Jeremy Corbell, and this is actually a link to the Open Mind story that I did not too long ago, where we got some exclusive information from Jeremy. Mickey Rourke is narrating the movie. Now, that's not something exclusive, although we got to be one of the first to announce this. But Mickey Rourke, famous actor, and in my story here, I have a clip where Mickey Rourke is practicing and working with Jeremy on the narration of this film about Lazar. Some other, stuff that Jeremy gave me to post, and the new trailer. So the new trailer gives you some insight about all of this, and for Den of Geek, actually, for my article here, he gave us an exclusive quote from Mickey Rourke, just kind of saying he's open-minded about UFOs, because, of course, everybody wants to know if he's part of the movie, what's he think about UFOs? So that's what this story was about. You also, because you still have time for this, have some information on how to get a discount and how to go to the premiere in LA to see this documentary. Now, I have seen it. Bum, bum, bum. And I'll tell you this, that I interviewed Jeremy recently, and we'll talk about that, but it changed. I watched the movie on this past Sunday. I then, the next morning, interviewed Jeremy Corbell for the latest podcast just earlier this week. I then had to change my line of questioning completely, because here's the good thing. Whether you're a skeptic or not, The good thing about this movie is we get to hear from Bob Lazar himself. This movie is all about interviewing Bob Lazar, talking to Bob Lazar, asking him some very tough questions, and he answers a lot of those tough questions. In fact, I didn't ask Jeremy this, and it was probably just my ego thinking this, but, I do talk about this with Jeremy and George Knapp quite a bit. And some of the questions I've had in the past were posed to Lazar, and I felt that up until this point, we didn't have good answers for those questions that I feel are hard questions. But thankfully, Jeremy asked those hard questions, and Lazar gave answers that I think are, I guess I'll say, legit, and need to be discussed further. But I don't want to be a spoiler. So I'm not going to tell you what those answers are, but don't worry, because in the next few weeks, we're going to have Jeremy back on the show. I'm going to debate him, over some of these things, and we'll see what his answers are. But I really feel that this new information has to get out. It's got to get out in the public, and people have to hear about it, because I feel that the Lazar now situation, the conversation's changed. It's different. We really can't debate or discuss whether Lazar is legit or not without discussing some of the new information that's revealed in this documentary. So that's why I don't even want to have that debate or conversation. So this movie is good for that way. I mean, that's what you want out of a documentary, right? Something that gives you where there's some real meat in there, some investigation, where you have original new information. And I got to say, even as a skeptic, that this documentary is compelling. I did a piece about Lazar potentially being disinformation. Let's see. And some people got mad at me about that, but I think it's a fair question. And here's why. If Lazar... Here we go. Let's see if I can find it. Yes, here it is. Oh, no, this is Majestic 12, a disinfo operation, which is a known disinfo operation. So anyway, I'll find that video. It's on YouTube here. You can go to the Open Minds TV YouTube, and you can see this video. I did this lecture in Las Vegas, actually, at the National Atomic Testing Museum, and they recorded it, and they allowed me to put it up on YouTube. But I do cover this situation. Doty, this is a known disinformation scandal. It really is. I mean, the gentleman, and some people debate, no, it's not. Well, it is. This gentleman, Doty, is the first person to ever bring up the term Majestic 12. You can see it right here, actually, in this graphic. He said this document that you see right here was faked, that it was disinformation that he was told to put out at the behest of his superiors. We do not have evidence that he's telling the truth, that he was acting on behalf of his superiors, but we do have this evidence that, he was feeding this document out. This is a great video. I hope everybody watched this. But what I did in this lecture at the National Atomic Testing Museum is I looked at the similarities between what we know with the Doty case and Bob Lazar. Am I saying he's definitely disinformation? No. But I have this feeling that, the stronger his case is, the stronger the case that might be the case as well. Because it's just so freaking weird. I mean, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And we don't have definitive evidence he was working on extraterrestrial spacecraft. So what is another potential answer? And I feel that is one potential answer. He didn't get in trouble. Of course, people would argue, well, if he got in trouble, they'd be showing that he was telling the truth. Not necessarily. I think there's ways that they could have taken him down. I mean, especially before this film, if he would have gotten sick and died, nobody would have cared. Another UFO guy dies. Big deal. I think that there was ways that they could have hid the information if he was telling the truth. I don't know. It's a hard case. Anyway, the documentary is very compelling. I think you all ought to see that. But that's this article, and you can watch the video for me. All I'm doing is speculating. I have no proof at all that Bob Lazar is disinformation, and he may not be at all. And really, it's just an exercise to kind of brainstorm that idea. I think it's a fair thing to discuss. But I'm not saying that's the case. I don't know. I don't know what the hell. This case, like I said to Jeremy recently, is in my gray basket. I think I said this on my podcast and Martin Willis's podcast UFO, that everything's in my gray basket. Like I said, to get out of this, you got to have some really extraordinary evidence. But Lazar honestly has teetered on the edge, where at times he's fallen out, and I'm like, this guy's ridiculous. There's no way his story is true. But now he's back in there where at least I'm considering it, and I'm thinking it's possible. And in order to discount this case, there's a lot of new information that Jeremy is bringing up with the help of George Knapp that we've got to look at critically, and we have to have answers for if we want to say definitively he's lying. So, weird stuff, man. In fact, with all that being said, there I is. Let's see what you guys are talking about. One day someone, I think he would have more paper if he was a disinfo guy. I don't know. Maybe more paperwork, like fake paperwork. I don't know. If that's what you mean, I'm not sure. Someone says, I was thinking he could be disinfo too because of his ties with Lear. Yeah. So, someone else, and I will address this. So, yeah, there's Lazar. You guys are just kind of thinking, yeah, maybe that's a possibility too, the disinfo. Thank you. Someone else, Osvaldo Franco. I'll try. You filmed some things in broad daylight up close. Someone needs to take a look. I mean, no offense, Osvaldo, but I get a ton of video and pictures on a regular basis. We're going to talk about some stories where a lot of these things are misidentified. So all I could say is, send me a link or something, and I'll try to take a look. But I'm so swamped just trying to get out what I can that I'll do my best. Mark D'Antonio is another good place to look. He's someone that I would refer you to as well, but I'll do my best. Somebody asked, does Lazar claim the MJ-12 documents are real? No, not that I have heard of. He doesn't seem to be that interested in this field that much, strangely enough. And you get this idea. I mean, he hasn't talked about his experiences since the UFO Congress, which was about 3 or 4 years ago. Prior to that, he hadn't talked about it for a decade, probably over a decade, except for a couple interviews, I think, with George Knapp. So he does not like talking to the public. He doesn't like talking about this issue and his claims. So, yeah, we rarely hear from him. It was awesome to get him at the Congress, and that was with the help of George Knapp. So let's go back. Laughing at myself because I got to get these buttons down, and then I get all this equipment in front of my screen. Oh, yeah. But let's see. So let's look at some of my latest podcasts, and we're going to go from the nearest and back out to the furthest because we've had some really good ones, some really fun ones. Of course, we talked to Jeremy Corbell. As I said, I didn't want to ask Jeremy to speak for Bob Lazar. Bob Lazar speaks for himself in the documentary, so people should see that if you want to hear these answers. But I could ask Jeremy personal questions, and he did give me some really, really interesting information, and some spoilers. So like I said, I interviewed him last Sunday. That morning, overnight, he was actually on Coast to Coast with Bob Lazar, being interviewed by George Knapp, who I mentioned earlier. So I asked if he had given any exclusive information out on the Coast and Coast interview. And he said, yeah, I did. I'll share it with you. And so essentially, George Knapp had found and talked to the person who gave Lazar his top secret clearance. But he couldn't find him. He had the name, but he couldn't find him. Well, Jeremy Corbell found him. He didn't want to go on the record and go on camera doing an interview, but according to Corbell, he did say, at least as far as I know, Lazar is legit. He did have a top secret clearance. I gave him that clearance. Somebody earlier asked if he believes in Majestic 12. I don't know. I have never heard him talk about this. I would think no, but we'll see. Although he did say that he had a clearance that was top secret magic. What do you do? So we also talked to Jeremy. He gave us a lot of really interesting information. How Jeremy first met Lazar. A strange story about this struggle that George and Lazar had, where they had to wrestle over this tape when they were going to be showing Lazar's first, interview and his face on TV for the first time. Incredible story, and a bunch of other incredible stories, essentially of how this all got started, how he began this friendship with Lazar, how he came to believe Lazar, and then how he came to create this documentary, and why he decided to be tough on Lazar in this documentary, to really ask the tough questions. And I think that is beautiful. I'm glad that he did that. I guess Lazar was not happy about it at first, but when Jeremy explained his logic behind it, he began to be cool with it. So we'll talk way more about this. We'll debate this. We'll talk about it in detail and maybe come to some ideas and conclusions. Of course, there's going to be so much debate going on. There's already Lazar debate going on out there. So there'll be more going on as this film gets out there and people start to see it. The other podcast I did recently was with Calvin Parker. This was very interesting. Calvin Parker is a witness in what's called the Pascagoula UFO incident. So he's a fisherman, Calvin. In fact, I think he was fishing before I interviewed him, and he went fishing after I interviewed him. So this guy is all about fishing. Well, he was fishing back in like 1970 something or rather. I think it was 1974 with his buddy. Essentially, he was a young guy. He was like 19 or 20, he said, and he had just started this new job, and a family friend had gotten him this job. Well, after their work day, they decided to go fishing nearby, and they were in Pascagoula, Mississippi. Well, as they're going out fishing, they see this UFO, this strange, saucer-like object that's floating over this pier. Soon these creatures come out and snag them, examine them. The story, then they get away. They get left out there, and they go to the police. The police are skeptical, but the police come to believe them because they essentially leave the room, and they planted a little microphone, or at least had the recording going in the interrogation room to see what these guys would do. And of course, they're going to be like, oh, they thought they'd be like, hey, we tricked these dumb cops. But no, they were freaked out, and they're like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? They're not going to believe us. What happened to us? Who were those things? And so the police came to believe them. And essentially, Calvin Parker, Charlie Hickson, the older gentleman, he had been out and talked about this incident quite a bit. But Calvin Parker didn't. Calvin Parker was embarrassed. He didn't want anything to do with this. The media got a hold of it soon after the event happened and was harassing them. So he skipped town. He left, and nobody had heard from him for decades. Philip Mantle, who writes often with OpenMinds.tv, a gentleman from the UK, got a hold of him, reprinted one of his books a book that was written about this whole incident in the past, and became friends with Calvin. So they worked on a book together that's coming out here soon. I think it's already out, actually. And in the show notes and stuff, if you click either of these links, you'll be able to see that. And I'll put more information here. I should put more information here. And, sorry, got a phone call. Spam. By the way, I have this AT&T. I have AT&T, and lots of phone carriers do this, where there's an app that'll tell you if the phone calls are spam or not, so you can block them. But yeah, Kelvin Parker hadn't been out and talked, so Philip Mantle got a hold of him, and now he is talking. He's going to come speak at the UFO Congress because he wants to talk to people. After the Congress, though, he is, and after, and since his book is getting out, but then he's decided to talk, but after that, he's done. He said he's just going off back into obscurity. He's not going to talk about UFOs or nothing anymore, and guess what Calvin's going to do with the rest of his life? That's right. You guessed it. He's going fishing. So, great guy. It was a fun interview, and I highly recommend it. We go step by step over like what happened, how he felt about it, where he's been and why, and all of that. So, it's a really fun interview. Ooh, see, my eyes went, because I got excited about this one. This is a really fun interview, too, and I don't think we had the chance to talk about this. We've talked about this topic, but I don't think I've been able to do a UFOs Seriously live since I did this interview. So, the government had a secret UFO program ran by the Department of Defense out of the Pentagon. We've talked quite a bit about that. Jeremy Corbell's last film was about Skinwalker Ranch, where it turns out was the impetus, was the beginning of the government UFO, of a government paranormal study. This is a study that the New York Times was writing about and actually kind of got things mixed up. This one was called OSAP, something like Advanced Aerospace Weapons Systems Application Program. I just did that by memory. I'm pretty impressed with myself. Anyway, OSAP is essentially what this acronym is. Well, this started, and we found this out from my interview with George Knapp, that this DIA guy wanted to come to Skinwalker Ranch because he had read George Knapp's book about this. Skinwalker Ranch was this ranch that was purchased by Robert Bigelow, who owns Bigelow Aerospace, in order to conduct research into these alleged paranormal happenings. A lot of crazy stuff happened. Finally, when it slowed down, George was able to write the book about it. Then this DIA guy read the book and said, hey, I want to go check out this ranch. So they let him. They don't let many people. Well, immediately this guy had an experience. He goes to Senator Harry Reid and says, we need to investigate this place. This is a big deal. Harry Reid says, I know Robert Bigelow. I think you're right. Let's do this. They get some funding, $22 million, and some other senators. This was across the aisle sort of bipartisan effort. This program begins in secret. And here's where it's weird. A few years later, about the 2011 period, these insiders in the government that are like this religious cabal think that the whole thing's demonic, that all of this paranormal stuff is because of demons and the devil and Satan and stuff. And they're like, we got to get out of this. And they're able to do it. They're able to get the program closed. When that program closed, then Luis Elizondo, who was kind of on the scene already, took over and kind of they created this ATIP program, which is the name of the program we heard about in the New York Times in December. This is the Pentagon UFO project. Essentially, Elizondo writes a piece around the same time that I put out this interview. In fact, I think the day before I talked to Nick, Elizondo writes this article that his predecessor, his career was destroyed by this religious cabal who, and how this shouldn't have been. He said he knows some of these religious people in the government and he worked with them and he respects them, but he doesn't agree that that's a good reason not to investigate some weird stuff going on, essentially. However, because he saw his predecessor get so devastated, I guess, and his career damaged by this whole thing, that when he did his UFO investigation, it was very low key. They kept under the radar and tried to not make any waves, which worked because he says they continue to this day, the ATIP program, although they're certainly making a lot of waves right now. But I think this might be good because they're talking to government officials and stuff like that. Well, George Knapp said that Nick Redfern had written about this cabal, and indeed he has. In fact, he wrote a book. Let's go look at it. Here it is. Here's the name of the book. You can click on the link here to actually see it. That's not the book. That's his latest book, though. But here's the book I'm talking about. Final Events and the Secret Government Group on Demonic UFOs and the Afterlife. So, you know, George Knapp said Nick Redfern had written a book on this and had to investigate it. So I was like, well, I need to talk to Nick Redfern about this. You may know I have Nick Redfern on quite a bit because he writes so many UFO and paranormal books that we're often interviewing him about his books. In fact, this first link I brought up is his latest book, which just came out earlier this month. Top Secret Alien Abduction Files, What the Government Doesn't Want You to Know. Ooh. I'll have him back on and we'll talk about that later. But in this book and in our interview, it was fascinating. Let's keep his picture up. You don't need to see me anymore. Let's look at Nick. Because Nick says he did get to investigate, and he got some insider info here. So there was an insider, essentially, who he was working with, who was giving him information about this, and they opened up. He was able to get this kind of cabal, which he said, in the group to talk to him, and essentially they decided they would let him reveal information that they hadn't revealed before to see what the public will do. And so he got to write about it. What he found was that there were actually, and this is really fascinating, two factions of this religious group. So there was a faction of this religious group that thought Satan's doing all this bad stuff. We need to stay away from Satan. But there was another group that said we need to investigate this and we need to discover what sort of power Satan has so we can harness this demonic power to use against our enemies. You know, like Nick says, he doesn't believe this stuff. He's just interviewing people, and this is what they're telling him. So you got to read his book and listen to this interview. It was fascinating. And to me, it makes sense. Why wouldn't it be? There's very, very many religious people out there. I personally am not a subscriber to any religious belief. If there is any belief, mine would be science. Or actually, I do like certain philosophies, like Buddhist type philosophies, but and even philosophies in other religions, but not necessarily theological ideas. But so it makes sense that these people would exist and that they would have these beliefs and then they would pursue them in their positions inside the government. So fascinating interview. What wild and crazy. And then George Knapp is in the middle of all of this. He's in the middle of, he's friends with Bigelow. He's friends with many of the people in this Tom DeLonge, his To the Stars Academy, which is made up of course, Luis Elizondo, who used to run this ATIP Pentagon program, and a lot of people who worked with Bigelow on Skinwalker and other investigations. Some of these people have said they don't believe Bob Lazar, but George Knapp, of course, is in the center of the Bob Lazar controversy. And in a clip that Jeremy Corbell put out recently, George Knapp is saying, look, Lazar's telling the truth. I don't know, there's a little bit of information that's kind of iffy, but I believe he's telling the truth, and I've talked to others who have confirmed that for me, and if people don't want to believe, so what? So he believes in Bob Lazar, this weird other case. So it's a weird world, people. And I think it's interesting, though, that Knapp and Jeremy are tackling these really tough issues that are at the heart of what's hot right now, and they're really at the epicenter, especially George Knapp. So I've said this over and over again. If you want the latest information on To the Stars or a lot of different revelations, George Knapp is the guy to watch. He's the guy to watch for credible information. Now, on his newscast, does he say Lazar's telling the truth? No. In his newscast, he reports the news. He reports the facts, and he lets the viewer decide, which is what you're supposed to do, right? So, yeah, lots going on. Let's go to the news, though. Let's see. Let's go to the headlines. Here they are. So some of the latest headlines. Here we have, meet J. Allen Hynek, the astronomer who first classified UFO close encounters. And this is a story by the History Channel. The History Channel? What are they doing writing about this? Well, you, my listeners, are well informed, so you know exactly why they're writing about this, because they're doing a TV show on this very topic. Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who helped the government investigate UFOs from the beginning of their research in 1947 with Project Sign on to Project Grudge, and then on to Project Blue Book. And then after 1969, when they closed Project Blue Book, he started his own organization called the Center for UFO Studies, where he scientifically studied UFOs, has been very influential. He was in Close Encounter. He was a consultant for the TV or the movie Close Encounters, and he has a cameo appearance in that. His protege Jacques Vallée, who is a French individual, terrible accent, I apologize for that, is the inspiration for Claude Lacombe, who is a French researcher in Close Encounters. What was the thing? This is a phenomenon sociological. He doesn't say very many English sentences in the movie Close Encounters, the main character, because he's French and he's got a translator, but that was one of them where he was trying to get this point across. This is a phenomena sociological. You got to see the movie Close Encounters if you haven't seen it. I know some of you younger folk have not. But Hynek didn't start believing in UFOs. He didn't believe in UFOs at all. He said they were ridiculous, utterly ridiculous, he said. But later, in his investigations with the Air Force, he changed his mind. He investigated the Pascagoula case and many other cases. So he, was a major inspiration for the continuation of the civilian research in UFOs. And now the History Channel is doing a TV show based off of this gentleman where they are covering real UFO cases. Based off of real UFO cases. I got the opportunity. This doesn't come out for another couple months. But again, just like I got the opportunity to see the Bob Lazar movie early, I got the opportunity to see a couple of episodes of this early as well. But hey, don't get too mad at me. I invited everybody who could come to come enjoy this with me. So, and many did. There was a packed house in Arizona. I heard there's a packed house everywhere else. There was a sneak peek I got to see a couple weeks ago, and then myself and some others were invited to do a panel by some of the promotions people for the History Channel. And the show is really good, I think. I liked it. I really liked the main character. Aidan Gillen is the actor who plays him. If you watch Game of Thrones, he is Littlefoot in Game of Thrones, who got killed recently. He plays a great character. Now, not all the facts are right on. I mean, in the TV show, Hynek, this is a little bit of a spoiler, I guess, but I wonder if they want me to. Well, I'll tell you this. In the TV show, I don't think this is a spoiler necessarily. There are little facts that are wrong. So, for instance, Hynek starts with the program later in the UFO TV show on the History Channel than he did in real life. He also came in as more of an open-minded person in the show as opposed to in real life. Also, they kind of give him credit in the early 50s for coining the phrase UFO. The Air Force did coin that phrase, but it was Colonel Ruppelt, who was the first head of Project Blue Book in 1952, who coined that phrase, not Alan Hynek. But these are kind of little things, and you know, if you're used to how television works, and of course I get to see these mechanisms because I interview the screenwriters and directors a lot of times, and these are my questions. But you also see that often characters represent not just who they're portraying all of the time. They may represent, you know, a number of characters, or they represent a certain aspect of, you know, whatever happened historically. And that's the case with Hynek. So they have to kind of squeeze all this in without bringing in new characters, still introduce these factual ideas. So, but those are little facts. What's cool, though, is that they're portraying these real cases, and at least some of the bare bones of these cases are very accurate, or at least they're real alleged occurrences. So after the third episode, because I guess every episode is going to be half an hour, because what we watched was about an hour long. So in the third episode, it's going to get into the Flatwoods Monster case, which is, if you're not familiar with that, you'll have to look it up because it's really interesting. But I have one more piece of very exciting Hynek news. So, AlienCon. I was at AlienCon in Baltimore a few weeks ago, and I did several talks, 3 talks. One of my talks was about Steven Spielberg. The beginning is all about Close Encounters, what I just talked about. But there are other great cases that inspired Spielberg, and so there's this rich UFO history with Spielberg, so I love doing this talk. After the talk, this professional-looking gentleman, tall, slender, walks up to me and he says, "My name is Paul Hynek. Thank you so much for all of the kind things that you said about my father, and I would like to stay in touch." You can only imagine how I felt, honored, excited. I can't think of, there's very few people in the UFO field, if anyone, that I hold in higher regard than this gentleman on the screen here, Dr. J. Allen Hynek. So to meet his son was an extremely big thrill for me. He gave me his card and said he wanted to stay in touch. We have been in contact. He says he does want to do an interview, a podcast interview, and possibly more. So we will hear from him, but exciting news for me. So yeah, lots going on. Really cool stuff. But let's go see what you guys are talking about. What's going on over here? So Dirk, people must have got into Nazi UFO talking, and because I see Mr. Dirk Bonesteel, which is such a funny name, always cracks me up every week. He says that Nazi BS is all made up, blah blah blah. You know what? I'm assuming he's bringing up Nazi UFO stuff because you see this online a lot, that the Nazis had these extraordinary UFOs and all this other stuff. Mostly, largely made off of BS. A lot of this was neo-Nazis who propaganda, kind of trying to prop up that the Nazis were more powerful and better than we thought. You know, they're great, and that's why we neo-Nazis are great. So, yeah, take with a huge grain of salt. I've talked about this before. I'll talk about it again. Maybe not right now, but the Nazi stuff, look it up. It's got a whole history where a lot of that stuff is made up and inaccurate. So let's see what else is going on. Oh, someone had a great question. If Area 51 had such advanced alien tech for 50 years, then why are we paying SpaceX hundreds of millions to take our stuff to space? That is a really great question. The believers would say that Lazar, that the technology that Lazar and others were working on was so high tech and it can't be shared, so they can't even share it with like NASA and others. So that's why NASA's not using that technology or others. But I think you have a great question there, because here's my argument to that. Well, it's corporations that would be developing. Corporations, everything's monetary, and we don't do anything for the most part. And this is really true with the space program and everything. In order to start a program, it's got to have, we've got to know the end game. And the end game has to be one that makes us a lot of money. So if it's not a profitable venture, the venture doesn't happen. Really, we see that over and over and over again. And even when it comes to conspiracies, that is still the case. As much as I've investigated all of these different conspiracies, it comes back to these very simple rules. We don't spend a lot of money unless we're going to make a lot of money. So why would they spend so much money reverse engineering this alien technology and then not use it? I think that's a great question. Now, this alleged Colonel Corso, or he wasn't alleged, he was a real person, but he alleged that he had some of the Roswell material, and he worked for the Pentagon, and that he farmed some of this technology out to private corporations who then developed that technology into microchips and other things like that. That actually sounds more plausible because, that's proprietary information. These corporations are never going to share where that came from. They don't have to. That's their tech. And but if they had this Lazar tech, wouldn't they be developing things off of it? That's a great question, because they would be stuck then not being able to make any money off of it. And so it would be a big waste of time. I think you have a great question. Another one I will say is that's kind of introduced by Lazar is that that they haven't figured it out. Actually, another Lazar skeptic who is Stanton Friedman has brought this up himself. He's said, if we were to have, let's say, if you gave Columbus a nuclear submarine, he wouldn't know what to do with it. He couldn't make heads or tails of it. He wouldn't be able to develop the technology from that submarine. Even, let's say this cell phone. If you would have given this cell phone to somebody 50 years ago, they wouldn't know what the hell. They would open it up and find all these weird little plastic things with wires. They wouldn't know what the heck those are, and they wouldn't. It wouldn't really help them in the meantime. So that is those are some of the excuses people have that why we don't see that tech in this 50 odd years. But I think you have a wonderful, wonderful point there, Mr. Apex, and it's an important one to bring up. Stanton Friedman is a smart guy. He's an actual scientist. Good point, my friend. So, yes, great question. Very fun question. So let's get into the rest of the news. We're running out of time. I always go too long here. But there's so much to talk about, right? It's an exciting topic. The rest of these stories, I got to be honest, are many of them are not that interesting. They're misidentifications. So I feel, and I could be wrong, here's a case from Texas in the Houston Chronicle. In fact, I have a little bit of the video here. And this thing does not move at all. Here's what I would suspect. They thought it might be a blimp, but there was no blimp in the area. But what happens, especially with these longer ones, is it's sometimes a little cloud, or it's part of a contrail. Because, of course, when a plane is flying across, with the contrails, you often only see little bits and a little piece there. Here's why I think that too, is that this object is not moving at all. It's in the same spot, and they even said, how could such a large thing not move? Well, if it's a cloud or a piece of a contrail that created a cloud and it's just reflecting the light, which happens like this at sunset, which you can obviously see, it's sunset. Um, why it looks so weird is the sun's so low, the sky's darker, and then the sun is coming in, the rays of light reflecting this object, making it super bright against the dark sky, and so it looks odd. That's what I would guess this to be, but I'm not sure. Of course, we need to look at it further, but we don't have much here. We just have, this little bit of video, and really it doesn't show much more than this because they even say it's not moving. I could be completely wrong, but I suspect that may be a possibility for what this is. And Houston Chronicle wrote up a story about it. Another story is in, the Syracuse New Time. And to be honest, I haven't read a whole lot of this, and I should have, because this is Cheryl Costa. Every week we talk about Cheryl Costa's articles, because every week she's writing an article with Syracuse New Times about UFOs. In this case, she's looking into the cases where there are egg-shaped UFOs. She brings up the Lonnie Zamora case. It's a case from New Mexico in 1964. Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who I mentioned before, this was like one of his favorite cases. In fact, another skeptical head of Project Blue Book, Hector Quintanilla, I believe he was the last head of Blue Book, he doesn't believe in UFOs, but he thought this was a really good case too. Essentially, there's this cop by Socorro in Socorro County, New Mexico, near Socorro. So it's kind of in the middle of nowhere. He's chasing a speeding teenager when he sees something out in the desert, like this egg-shaped craft with these critters walking around it or something. He stops to take a look. They somehow get scared, get in the craft. The craft lifts up and shoots over his head, flies away. And there was actually a little bit of physical evidence and some burn marks and things like that, which is why this is a case that people feel is credible. So Ray Stanford, who's mentioned here, is one of the top investigators of this case. But this is kind of interesting. She essentially is going over the total number of egg-shaped objects being seen. Now, she sees an increase in the number of egg-shaped objects being reported. However, that's not too surprising because there's an increase in sighting reports. Why? We've talked about this before. My belief, because I was the PR guy for MUFON for many of these years right in here, I believe because there was more awareness of MUFON and the ability that you could report to them, and that's why we had that. However, I do see some interesting things here because I think UFO sightings overall dropped in 2017, but it seems as though egg-shaped objects rised. So that would be an interesting statistic. And also to see that, there's 128 of them is also interesting. So she's got a little bit more about that on her website on this story here. So interesting topic. I haven't read that in detail, like I said, so that was kind of just a synopsis. Here's another sighting, and this is what I was talking about earlier. I wanted to talk about here because we see a lot of this kind of thing. Oh no, this one's weird. So see this object here? It almost looks like, they're going to play an ad here, so we won't be able to see it. But let me go there again. Essentially, as this person's driving, they're filming, and this weird little thing here disappears. But it looks like a distortion to me. We'd have to talk to Mark D'Antonio, but my guess would be actually that was some kind of camera screw up. But it's a very short article. But what's interesting about this article is it's in the Irish Examiner because there was a UFO sighting reported by pilots in that area. We've talked about this before. And these commercial pilots, the audio was released and you could hear them talking about it. Really interesting case that has gotten Irish news really excited. And international news talked about it for a little bit. But the Irish news is really into UFOs right now because of that case. Finally, here is what we see so many times over and over again is something like this. One little light in the sky. People zoom in and they see this and they're like, oh my gosh, in this case, they're like, it looks like a crystal. It looks like a object inside of an object or something. No, people, sorry to once again be a poo-pooer, a UFO poo-pooer, because when a point of light in the sky is kind of hard to film, and these are typically things that are very far away, and they can be hard to focus on. When you focus on it, it's a tiny piece of light. When you're out of focus, this is what they look like. So UFO investigators, those of you who are UFO field investigators for MUFON or anyone else, you know you've seen this many, many, many times before, that people will film stars or something like that, and they'll be out of focus and they'll say, oh my gosh, look at this. And I don't blame them, because they do look weird. And what also happens is, especially if it's lower on the horizon and you're shooting through lots of atmosphere, it'll change colors and look really weird. But that's because of the distortion of the atmosphere itself. So these, especially Venus or something, go out right now if you have clear skies and try this with your phone or something. Try to film something lower on the horizon. You'll get a more spectacular effect. And you'll see all these various colors, and it'll look weird. But that's just because of our atmosphere, people. So there you have it, my friends. I should have shown you the browser here when I talked about these. But there is a browser. All of these stories that I just talked about, I just updated right here. So you can't see them here yet because it takes like a little bit for our it takes a little bit for our the service that we have for security, like, takes a little bit for our posts to come up. That's why you don't see it there, but it'll be there probably within the next hour. But that's where you could see all those stories. Of course, you could go to my Patreon to see more. And then what did she have? My honey brought over some new stuff we have. We have, as you can see here, alien beanies. We have some beanies with aliens on them. I think I showed you guys before that 3D optical light thingy. And we have all kinds of different ones. We have like Star Trek ones and Star Wars ones. We've got the alien one. So we have lots of cool. And we have multiple colors of these beanies. Merry Christmas. So because you're all UFO enthusiasts, tell your family to go to store.ufocongress.com to buy you gifts. And then if you have a UFO enthusiast in the family or alien enthusiast, or if you just want to, spread the alien UFO love and give all your family some UFO or alien stuff, head over to store.ufocongress.com. Like I said, you got to check out, too, I made a video of these lamps right here. But I'm going to make a new one, too, with the gray and the silver lamps that we got, so you could see those. They're really cool, and we have them up at the store, so you could take a look at that. So where can you find the store? Well, actually, if you go to openminds.tv, there's plenty of links over to the Congress, like if you go to UFO Conference. And then if you're at the Congress, you could click this link at the top here that says store, or this link here that goes to the store. And look, there is our store. So we got tons of stuff. So if you go to merchandise, we have jewelry. Look at those. Ooh. We have lamps. So here we go. Why don't I just show you here? Duh. So there's some of the 3D lamps. We got Darth Vader, one of the part of the evil empire. Here's the different lamps. So here's the one behind me, and there's a silver and the gray. R2-D2. Star Trek, Star Wars, lots of cool stuff. And then, of course, we've got t-shirts and everybody's favorite, DVD lectures. Ooh, that hoodies. But most people like to come to our store and buy lectures of the various people that we have, including, this is one of our most popular, Bob Lazar. One of the very few places you can see him live, besides this brand new documentary that's going to be coming out in a week. So pop on over and watch this video. In fact, if you see on the Open Minds on the top, there's a link to the video portal. And this is our on-demand. You can literally go right now and watch any of the videos. Like right up here, you're like, I want to see what Lazar says. I want to watch right now. I'm so excited about Lazar. You can come here and watch the video right here. You could pay for a free, you could get a free trial and watch it right now. There's also George Knapp, and he's talking about Lazar and why he thinks it's a legit case. Great talk, very interesting, and also very compelling. So, and to me, you know, George Knapp, like he's a big mentor of mine. If George Knapp thinks it's legit, that's another reason I keep considering it. Why I keep keeping it in the gray basket. So, you know, really interesting stuff. Cortola says, Rojas, how do I donate? Well, if you go, why not? I'll just do this. I don't know. It seems unkosher somehow to show this page, which is us talking. And of course, you can see the past in a few seconds ago. But here's us talking. If you click this button, you can do that. Or if you go to Patreon, here's what I would like to do. I feel guilty when people just give me money. So if you go at least become a patron, you'll get early access to stuff other people won't get. So that's a good way to do it. Otherwise, if you buy any of that swag, or if you go to like, let's see, one of our, let's say you want to go watch one of our videos. Like let's go look at one of the videos I talked about earlier. Let's say Lazar again. Let's see, what do we have on Lazar? We got lots of stuff on Lazar. See? But let's say we want to go to disinfo, huh? Here we go. Right here, Area 51 and aliens, another UFO disinformation. Just watch one of our videos, and then you'll see down here, there's options to buy t-shirts and stuff. Buy a t-shirt. You can also see those here. They're pretty cool. So anyway, there's any number of ways. It would be great. I want to make sure that you get something for it. So there's any of those things will help out. So thank you so much for asking. But otherwise, I better head out. I better act like a baby and head out. So this is my end screen. I'm sorry, guys, but it is time to say goodnight and bid you adieu. Thank you so much for joining me once again for UFOs Seriously Live, where we take a serious look, even though I'm a goofball, at the UFO topic and cover some of what we've been talking about. Luckily, if you want a more, someone with a demeanor who's very serious and doesn't goof around, you know, lots of my people I've interviewed, like Nick Redfern, George Knapp lately, Calvin Parker, very serious. We talk very seriously about this topic and get some great information out. So, again, thank you all so much for joining me, and we'll talk to you next week. Until then, adios, muchachos.